I had not visited headquarters for 25 years when I intervened to resolve a conflict between two workers. One of the individuals involved, department manager Kenneth, became enraged with me and began to gripe. "Don't belittle me. Why are you here at all? An outsider. You and other worthless country bumpkins are not welcome here." A second later, Mr. Kingsley was standing next to Kenneth, his face red with rage, and he yelled, "What are you saying, Kenneth? Are you even familiar with this man? Hey, Mr. Kingsley, what's causing your distress? I take it that he's merely the new part-time employee." Kenneth's impolite comment caused Mr. Kingsley to sigh deeply, dismissed him, and bowed deeply to me. Eli is my name. I'm 48 years old, which is when most normal employees in any corporation would be at their best. I visited a phone app development company today. It was a tiny business that produced home video game software while I worked here. I was one of only 2 employees, and we use only our laptops to work on games in a small room. However, the firm took off after we began developing phone apps, and it has since expanded to the point that its headquarters are housed in a huge building in California that is so tall that looking at the top of it hurts your neck. They called me back for employment after I had been living in the country. Many youthful staff members appeared to have joined during my absence. I couldn't help but question whether they still required my assistance. I felt a shock on my shoulder as I looked up at the headquarters. A man in his 50s was staring at me when I turned around. We appeared to have run into each other. I stood in front of the entryway and said, "Sorry about that." The path was sufficiently broad for him to avoid me, yet it might have been my fault. The man snorted and looked down at me as I moved back and held up my hand in apology. I was a little annoyed that my return to headquarters had been interrupted, but I motioned him to move aside. With a heavy sigh, the man said, "Don't just stand around in the middle of the path like some clueless country bumpkin," and went inside the building. I dismissed it, pulled out my employee badge, and went into the headquarters myself. Where had the development section disappeared to? The number of years that had passed since my last visit was beyond my memory. I made my way to the upper floors to look for the development department, but I soon became disoriented because I had not visited headquarters for 25 years when I intervened to resolve a conflict between 2 workers. One of the individuals involved, department manager Kenneth, became enraged with me and began to gripe. "Don't belittle me. Why are you here at all? An outsider. You and other worthless country bumpkins are not welcome here." A second later, Mr. Kingsley was standing next to Kenneth, his face red with rage, and he yelled, "What are you saying, Kenneth? Are you even familiar with this man? Hey, Mr. Kingsley, what's causing your distress? I take it that he's merely the new part-time employee." Kenneth's impolite comment caused Mr. Kingsley to sigh deeply, dismissed him, and bowed deeply to me. Eli is my name. I'm 48 years old, which is when most normal employees in any corporation would be at their best. I visited a phone app development company today. It was a tiny business that produced home video game software while I worked here. I was one of only 2 employees, and we use only our laptops to work on games in a small room. However, the firm took off after we began developing phone apps, and it has since expanded to the point that its headquarters are housed in a huge building in California that is so tall that looking at the top of it hurts your neck. They called me back for employment after I had been living in the country. Many youthful staff members appeared to have joined during my absence. I couldn't help but question whether they still required my assistance. I felt a shock on my shoulder as I looked up at the headquarters. A man in his 50s was staring at me when I turned around. We appeared to have run into each other. I stood in front of the entryway and said, "Sorry about that." The path was sufficiently broad for him to avoid me, yet it might have been my fault. The man snorted and looked down at me as I moved back and held up my hand in apology. I was a little annoyed that my return to headquarters had been interrupted, but I motioned him to move aside. With a heavy sigh, the man said, "Don't just stand around in the middle of the path like some clueless country bumpkin," and went inside the building. I dismissed it, pulled out my employee badge, and went into the headquarters myself. Where had the development section disappeared to? The number of years that had passed since my last visit was beyond my memory. I made my way to the upper floors to look for the development department, but I soon became disoriented because the building had so many rooms that looked alike. At that moment, I saw the same man who had previously bumped into me. I was a little taken aback. He saw me too and said something right away. "Hey you, only authorized workers are allowed on this floor. No outsiders are permitted. Quit aimlessly and head straight to your part-time job." Based on my attire, the man must have assumed I was a temporary employee recruited on a part-time basis. Since I was dressed casually today, in a gray blazer, white shirt, and no tie, he most likely didn't believe that I worked there full-time. He waved me away as though I were a stray animal. "No, actually Here, we're occupied. Simply get to your part-time work." I was interrupted by the man's intense gaze as though I were unworthy of his attention. He must have assumed he would see me get off the floor. I chose to follow his instructions and get off the floor, so I resigned. However, the man grabbed my hand and stopped me just as I was ready to hit the elevator button to walk downstairs. This elevator is exclusively available to full-time workers. The man, obviously having fun at my expense, smiled as he said, "Part-timers like you should use the stairs." I became irritated when I realized he only intended to further humiliate me, but I didn't want to start a scene that would only serve his interests. I forced myself to control my temper and gave him a composed grin. "Oh, is that correct? I apologize." The man nodded in agreement with my response. I took a quick look at his employee badge, which had the name of Kenneth, manager of the development department. Well, Kenneth, I'll keep that in mind. I made sure to get a good look at Kenneth's expression as I made my way to the stairs, even though I knew it was petty. I continued to descend the lengthy stairs, floor by floor, but after going down a few flights, I came to the conclusion that trying to go down dozens of levels on foot was somewhat risky. Since I was merely going down, I initially believed it would be simple, but before long, I was out of breath. It turned out that the closest floor was a break room, so I went outside to take a break. Beside it was a kitchenette with a microwave, kettle, refrigerator, and even a vending machine. "Thank goodness," I said to myself. "I'll take a break and then make a call." I quickly finished the iced coffee I had purchased after realizing how thirsty I was. Just as I was starting to catch my breath, I heard my phone ring. The individual I was going to call apparently just gave me a call. "Hello, this is Eli." "Where are you?" The person on the other line sounded shocked. "I've been waiting for your call," she said. "Don't worry about that. I'll send a car to pick you up if you just let me know when you get at the station." "Where are you now then?" "Right now. Well, I was about to say I was already at the headquarters, but I stopped myself. Since it had been so long since I last visited, I thought it might be a good idea to take a look around the company myself to see how things were running now and what kind of employees were working here. With that in mind, I pretended I hadn't arrived yet. "I'm not at the station yet, but I'll be there soon. I'll call you when I get there." I ended the call with that excuse. It had been 25 years since I last came to headquarters, so even the older employees like Kenneth didn't seem to recognize me. Thinking about that, I felt a sense of excitement, like I was a kid about to explore some grand new place. But I reminded myself that at my age, it wouldn't do to be so giddy. Besides, wandering around too much might get me mistaken for an intruder, like what happened with Kenneth earlier. With that in mind, I decided to explore the building discreetly. As I walked around aimlessly, I passed by a meeting room and heard raised voices coming from inside. "Let's stop this, Kenneth. Someone's going to notice." Intrigued by the tense conversation, I quietly approached the door to listen in. "Who you think you're talking to? I could have you kicked out of the development department by tomorrow if I wanted." Recognizing the voice, I peeked inside and saw Kenneth, the same man who had been rude to me earlier. He said he could kick someone out of the department. Maybe he had some connections with the higher-ups. As I pondered this, Kenneth stepped out of the room and made eye contact with me. "Quit wandering around like a part-timer. This floor is restricted." Kenneth shot me a sharp glare. But another man nearby spoke up. "Wait a minute. Is this the new hire?" "The new part-timer for the development department." "Great. Go get me a coffee. Hurry up." Kenneth, seemingly flustered from having his argument overheard, vented his frustration at me. I bowed my head repeatedly in a show of submission. "My apologies for the interruption. I'll get it right away." Satisfied with my response, Kenneth finally seemed to calm down. However, as he walked past me, he deliberately bumped into my shoulder before hurrying off. As I watched him go, the man who had stayed behind in the meeting room approached me. "Are you all right?" Kenneth can be pretty rough with both his words and actions. "Thank you. It's my fault for eavesdropping. But if you don't mind me asking, did something happen to you?" Remembering the heated argument from earlier, I asked the man. He gave me a troubled look, but after some thought, decided to explain. "Kenneth's father is either the CEO or a high-ranking executive here. We're part of the development department, but Kenneth doesn't know the first thing about development. Thanks to his connections, he was placed as department manager, though he always has his subordinates do all the work, then takes credit for the results, pretending to be a capable manager. His confession surprised me, but it also piqued my curiosity. That's awful. Nepotism. Huh. Please keep what I said between us." "I understand. I won't tell anyone. But don't you feel frustrated about having your work stolen? Is your work in development really something you take that lightly?" I had my own passion for development, which is why I couldn't help but press him on the issue, even though it wasn't really my business. "Of course I'm frustrated," the man replied. "But if I go against Kenneth, I could get kicked out of the development department. I love this job." He then grinned mischievously. "I've put up with Kenneth's antics because I love my work, but I've reached my limit. That's why I added a little trick to the data he took from me. Any developer could easily fix it, but there's no way Kenneth will be able to figure it out." His boyish grin made me laugh. "That sounds fun, but won't Kenneth try to get back at you for that? If that happens, I'll come up with another plan. You can't create good work when you're feeling stifled." Suddenly, the man realized he had been talking too much and looked startled. "I've said too much to someone I just met. I'd better get back to work." "Wait, can I ask your name?" "My name's Ted." "Oh, and I'll get Kenneth's coffee, so don't worry about it." Ted kindly offered to help, but I shook my head and simply thanked him for the offer. "No, I was the one who was asked, so I'll make sure to get the coffee. You should get back to work." "Well then, I'll leave it to you." Ted smiled warmly, gave me a small wave, and headed back to work. After seeing him off, I called the number I had pre-registered. "Hello, this is Eli." "Yes, how can I help you?" Naomi, my secretary, answered almost immediately after the phone rang. "I'm sorry, but could you bring some coffee to the development room?" "Certainly. How many should I bring?" "Just one will do." After hanging up, I started thinking about why I'd been called back to headquarters after 25 years. Maybe I was brought in to deal with this situation. If that's the case, then I'll have to rise to the occasion. I steeled myself as I quietly entered the development room. Inside, people were preparing for a presentation, with Kenneth at the front reviewing some data. The data on the screen was likely the one he had taken from Ted. Kenneth was so focused that he didn't even notice me entering the room. Just then, another man approached me, possibly thinking I didn't belong there. But as soon as he saw my face, he let out a surprised gasp. "Wait, aren't you? Kenneth's presentation is about to start." I gestured for him to be quiet, and once he saw Kenneth begin his presentation, he seemed to decide to join me in watching. Kenneth started explaining the data smoothly, and the audience nodded in agreement, clearly impressed. Given how confidently he spoke, it was easy to see why he acted so arrogantly. However, his smooth performance only lasted for the first half. Midway through the presentation, the data on the screen suddenly glitched, and then the screen turned completely blue. Huh. What's going on? Kenneth frantically tried to fix the issue, but all his efforts were in vain. The blue screen suddenly switched to a shooting game that began playing automatically, accompanied by cheerful music. What? What is this? Kenneth scrambled to stop the game, but unable to figure out how, it continued on. He was quickly defeated, and after the game ended, a short video appeared on the screen. The video showed clips of Kenneth slacking off, napping lazily around the office, shirking work, and making snide remarks to Ted, exposing his bad behavior in a series of embarrassing scenes. This isn't what it looks like. There's been some mistake. Even though Kenneth was in a panic, he kept trying to fix the data, but no matter how much he pressed random buttons, sweating profusely, nothing improved. In frustration, he slammed down the keyboard and let out an angry yell. Ted, what the hell is this? Your data is broken. Fix it now. The other developers in the room shook their heads in disbelief, while the upper management looked at Kenneth with shock. He had just unintentionally admitted to stealing his subordinate's work in front of everyone. The man standing next to me spoke up. So this is Ted's data? What are you thinking, presenting someone else's work as your own? Ted, could you shut it down? Following the man's instructions, Ted calmly walked over to Kenneth's computer and quickly shut off the screen. Instead of thanking him, Kenneth, shaking with anger, spat out his words. This is your doing, isn't it, Ted? As Kenneth prepared to lash out further, I spoke up, keeping my voice calm. Kenneth, that's enough. You don't want to embarrass yourself any more than you already have. Everyone in the development room turned to look at me, their faces full of surprise. But the most shocked of all was Kenneth, whose name I had just called. Frustrated, he directed his anger at me. What are you doing here? You're just a part-timer. Don't talk down to me. Where's my coffee, anyway? Useless country bumpkins like you shouldn't even be here if you can't do something as simple as that. As Kenneth advanced toward me, the man standing next to me stepped in. His face, red with anger, appeared beside Kenneth as he shouted at him. Kenneth, what are you saying? Do you even know who this man is? Ha! Why are you getting mad, Mr. Kingsley? Who is this guy? He's just a new part-timer, right? Whoever hired this useless country bumpkin is an idiot. Mr. Kingsley let out a deep sigh at Kenneth's rude remarks. Ignoring Kenneth, he turned to me and bowed deeply. My deepest apologies. Not only did you have to witness this embarrassing situation, but you were also treated with such disrespect. I'm truly sorry. Why are you apologizing, Mr. Kingsley? This guy is just a part-timer, Kenneth sneered at me. Mr. Kingsley was about to scold him further when Naomi entered the room with 1 cup of coffee and headed straight toward me. Excuse me, I've brought the coffee, CEO Mr. York. Sorry for the wait. Thank you. I'm sorry to have bothered you with this, I replied, taking the coffee from Naomi and handing it to Kenneth, whose mouth hung open in disbelief. Here you go, your coffee. Kenneth, who had been so confident just moments earlier, suddenly turned pale and began shaking. His legs wobbled, and his eyes darted around in confusion. Wait. What? CEO. Isn't this guy just a part-timer? What's the matter? This is the coffee you asked me to get for you, I said. Thank you, Kenneth stammered, taking the coffee with trembling hands. He sipped it quickly before placing it down on the table. The other employees, witnessing the scene, glanced anxiously between Kenneth and me, while Mr. Kingsley rubbed his forehead in embarrassment, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. At that moment, Mr. Sullivan hurried into the room. It seemed Naomi had informed him about the situation. When he saw me, he casually said, "Naomi told me," and I was shocked. "Why are you already at the office, and what's going on here?" In truth, I am the CEO of this company. I'm also Mr. Sullivan's nephew, and though I hold the title of CEO, I hadn't set foot in the headquarters for 25 years. So, it's no wonder the current employees didn't know who I was. The only one who recognized me was Mr. Kingsley, one of the veterans of the company, which is why all this confusion unfolded. I was watching the development presentation, but it seems like there are quite a few issues. So, you figured it out already. That makes things easier. Please, won't you return to headquarters? Mr. Sullivan's request caught me off guard. When I was still a student, I had developed a now extremely popular game with my uncle. With the profits from that game, my uncle founded this company, becoming the president while I took on the role of an advisor, aiming to grow the company together. As times changed, we expanded into phone app development, and the number of employees gradually increased. However, in my pursuit of perfection, I often gave harsh feedback, which created a tense atmosphere within the company. When I was younger, I couldn't handle the stress of not getting things exactly how I wanted, and I even yelled at employees in front of their colleagues. I made them work overtime for days to complete projects, which eventually earned me the nickname the Drill Sergeant. It was my uncle, then the president, who always mediated between me and the employees, diffusing the tension. Seeing the troubled expression on his face, I decided to step back and move to the countryside, leaving the big projects to the company. I focused on developing simple yet quirky games, living off their modest earnings. That was 25 years ago. By the time I looked up at the towering headquarters building earlier today, my uncle had grown this company into what it is now, all on his own. As I stood before the building, I realized that stepping away and letting the company evolve without me had been the right decision. I hadn't expected to be given the title of CEO at some point, though. Snapping out of my nostalgic thoughts, I turned my attention to Kenneth, who was visibly shaken. Kenneth couldn't hide his surprise at the fact that I, whom he thought was just a part-time worker earlier, was actually the CEO of this company. By the way, Kenneth, you mentioned earlier that you could kick Ted out of the development department by tomorrow. What did you mean by that? Oh, that was just a bluff. I thought if I said that, everyone would believe I had connections with upper management and treat me favorably. I see. It's impressive that you could convince people with such a lie. You've got a talent for persuasion. It's a shame you haven't put that skill to better use. I wasn't mocking Kenneth. While his approach was misguided, I was genuinely impressed by his ability to make people believe in his false authority. But upon hearing my words, Kenneth collapsed from his chair, falling to his knees and practically clinging to me as he shouted his apology. I'm so sorry. No, stand up. If you're going to apologize, it should be to Ted, not me. Based on that video, it seems like there's a lot you need to make up for. Kenneth slowly rose to his feet, his eyes red and on the verge of tears, and stood before Ted. Ted, I'm really sorry for everything. I was always jealous of how you, despite being younger than me, kept coming up with innovative ideas. I'm getting older and don't feel like I can learn new things anymore, so I invite your creativity. I'm truly sorry for everything I've done. Kenneth placed his hand over his heart and sincerely apologized to Ted. Watching this scene, Mr. Sullivan looked at me with a thoughtful expression, clearly plotting something. So, how would you resolve this, Mr. York? I get it, Mr. Sullivan. I laughed, then turned to Kenneth, who remained slumped. Kenneth, from now on I'm going to personally teach you everything about development. And if you're truly sorry, you'll work together with Ted and support him going forward. Wait, I'm not getting fired. It seemed Kenneth had braced himself for the worst, fully expecting to be fired after his rude behavior in Ted's incriminating video. But I don't give up on people that easily. I enjoy teaching people who don't know the joys of development. It's like playing a simulation game where you nurture talent. It's fun, isn't it? So, from now on, Kenneth, I'm going to give you a thorough education. As I smiled, Mr. Kingsley muttered under his breath, You've still got that drill sergeant style. Ha! The drill sergeant. Kenneth, trembling like a newborn fawn, was clearly shaken. The role reversal from his earlier arrogance was almost comical, and Mr. Sullivan couldn't help but chuckle as he tried to wrap things up. Well, he did retreat to the country